This episode is brought to you by the Cornell Executive MBA MS in Healthcare Leadership, in partnership with the Weill Cornell Graduate School of Medical Sciences. The future of healthcare needs motivated and business-minded leaders who are equipped to facilitate change from within their organization and throughout the industry at large. Offered on the weekend in New York City, the Cornell Executive MBA MS in Healthcare Leadership is the only dual degree of its kind, combining business breadth and healthcare depth with world-class faculty instruction and an unmatched alumni network. Take the next step towards driving innovation in the healthcare industry by connecting with their admissions team. Search Cornell EMBA-MS to start your journey.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella, Herrera. Hey, Maricella, this is our last episode of the year. Are you excited?
Yeah.
So tell me, do you have a favorite episode of 2021?
That's a really hard question to answer. There's so much we've covered. I mean, I'm always going to be biased and say the Mobilized Women replays I love because I love Mobilized Women. I love the conversations we have on that stage, and I love that we can share them with our podcast listeners too.
Yeah. Well, that's always good. And certainly every time I re-listen to those conversations, I learn something new. They're always so densely packed and so much great stuff. So it's fun to re-listen to them when I'm going on my walk or in the car, listening to the Ellevate podcast. But I have to say, I mean, I'm pretty biased because this year I've had the opportunity to do many of these conversations. And there's one thing I've learned, is that our careers and lives are not a straight path. There's so many amazing stories and places where our guests have landed. And it's inspiring to me because oftentimes we may feel stuck. We may feel we don't have that voice that, why would someone listen to me? But these are just stories of everyday people who are around us every day, who work alongside of us, who have something to share. And each one of our listeners has amazing things to share. We want to hear from you. Please send us a message on social media at Ellevate Network, hashtag ElevatePod. We want to hear your story because this is all about stories. It's about shattering that myth that success is one thing. It appears in one way. Success is, the Karen Lee who's creating pathways to employment for many underserved communities. And success is Radha, who is reinventing what it means to have a dance party. And success is so many of our other guests throughout the year, 52 of them, who just leave us with something special. And that's part of this community. Beyond the podcast, we have the Ellevate Network, which is 250,000 women leading businesses, starting businesses, supporting one another. And every day I am inspired by their stories and by the work that they do. So I would say that every episode of the Ellevate podcast is my favorite because I've learned something, I've been inspired. And all of that culminates into me having this unshakable belief in the power of women in our world, the power of women to create change and to ensure that we all succeed.
I love it. You're very right.
Oh, of course I am. I'm kidding. Well, thank you, Maricella. Our guest today is Mridu Parikh. She is a productivity coach, speaker, and founder of Life is Organized. And as many of us feel that life is not organized, this is a conversation for you. Mridu just has a lot of great advice and insights on how we can look at our life and see those synergies and clarity. She's a very inspiring speaker, and I'm proud to end 2021 with my interview with her.
That's amazing. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Mridu, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Kristy, this is a dream of mine, so I'm so excited. Thank you for sharing me with your audience.
I wanted to get us started just learning a little bit more about you. Would you mind sharing your story with our audience?
Absolutely. My parents emigrated from India when I was first born. As soon as my mom could travel, we came over, moved to Queens when I was 6 weeks old. And growing up, I didn't understand how helpful or how unusual I think my father was in my upbringing. Both my parents were wonderful, had a great upbringing, but he took a very non-traditional route and came over from India back in the early 70s with no job, no money, literally the shirt in his back, and left his very great engineering job at IBM, which was a very big success there, to come and start an entrepreneurial journey here. And he has been a successful serial entrepreneur his whole life. And unlike many of my friends and relatives who had come over and immigrated, they heard growing up that they needed to be a doctor or an engineer. And that was just like the career path for many firstborn American Indians here, was a doctor and engineer. And my dad always said, just do what you love. Do what you love. I remember this so vividly growing up. He said, if you do what you love, you'll be successful. So I couldn't appreciate it at that time growing up and how unusual that was until much later in life. So fast forward many years, after college, I got into marketing and in the corporate career path in New York. We never left New York until I got married. And I had my first son, and living in New York, there was this culture there that we're working just these 12-hour days. And I felt very overstretched, wasn't seeing my son at all. I felt like he was being raised by my nanny. And my husband then got a job opportunity in Nashville. Now, keep in mind, this is 15 years ago. Nashville is not cool, not the it city at that time. I had never really left New York. And I was like, there's no way I'm going. But he said to me the magic words at that time, which were, if you go, you don't have to work. And I thought I hit the lottery. So I was like, okay, sign me up. We'll go for a couple of years. Lo and behold, of course, we get here. We have our second son. And I soon am realizing this was not what I thought I was cut out to do. I really missed my work. I really, I just needed something more than motherhood, although that was wonderful. So that's when I heard that voice of my dad in my head of, do what you want, do what you want. I was like, this is my time. And that was really like the catalyst to my entrepreneurial journey. I took several of those, those quizzes and assessments you take, trying to figure out, well, what should I do? What am I good at? And what I came up on was a few kind of just common denominators of, I love service. I love to help. I love to make people feel better. I'm really great at organizing. I'm really good at systemizing. And where I landed was on professional home organizing, which again, back then, 12 years ago, there's no Container Store, no Marie Kondo, no Home Edit, right? This is just like pre all of that. And I was like, gosh, can I really get paid to do this for someone? Well, I won't get into all the details, but yes, it turns out it was an actual career, and I embarked on my home organizing profession. Soon to realize I didn't love actually organizing people's houses, but what I loved was the teaching and coaching. So I quickly moved to an online model where I was teaching classes and DIY and speaking around the country. After a few years of doing that, 4 or 5 years, I actually was at this, it's like culmination, this point where I was sort of falling out of love with my business because I was hearing a lot of resistance from my clients because as much as they wanted to get organized, they were very short on time and couldn't make it a priority. And I myself was also feeling that personally. I was growing this business. I had 2 young kids. We were doing all the things as women do. And I felt overwhelmed and I felt like I wasn't reaching my own goals fast enough. And it was during this time when I went on a personal growth development journey, I guess, to really start delving into the world of time management and productivity. And over time in that next year, I basically transitioned my whole business that way. And I wanted to tell you that whole part of the story because I think it's really important for women to realize or know that even when you think you've landed on the thing, you've taken all the assessments, everything leads up to this point, it's going to change and you're going to evolve. And we never really get there. And now I'm that former home professional organizer turned productivity pro. I now help women entrepreneurs particularly mom entrepreneurs, take control of all their demands and all their distractions so that they are more in control at home and at work. But I now look at it like, and who knows what my next path will be? I think this is it. And I feel super passionate. And I know that at the crux, I'll always want to be helping women and helping them simplify and live better lives. But now, as I've gone through these series of changes, I realize we're never at that end point. The journey is just always going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there that resonates with me. I also was working, crazy New York City hours when I had my first child. And I mean, in general, life is just complex and complicated and, competing priorities and needs, both professionally and personally. And, if you're like me, for a long time, I just sort of let the life dictate, what I was doing and where I was spending my time, and I wasn't as intentional about it. And, got to a point where I had to just stop and reassess and be more intentional so that I could make the space for the things that mattered most. And I can't wait to dive into more, life is organized and the work that you do. I wanted to start just setting the stage with your typical customer. You said it's typically a working caregiver, entrepreneur. What do you usually hear? What are their experiences like, and why are they coming to you?
They are typically probably a lot like the listeners of this podcast. They're ambitious. They're really driven. We're not satisfied with status quo, mediocrity, ho-hum, right? We're always trying to be a better self and a better version of ourselves. So in that process, because we're the moms and the leaders and the managers and want to be the role models and the mentors and the wives and the daughters, that with that comes, like you said, a lot of complexity and a lot of wearing many hats. And so they're feeling overstretched. We're feeling overwhelmed. Feel like, and at some point you get to a point where they feel like, I'm not doing any of those things well. Like I'm ambitious to do them all well, but now I'm so stretched in so many different directions. Feel like I'm not being a great business owner, or I'm not totally present for my kids, or my parents aren't really there when I need them, and they're and unfortunately, sometimes that can even lead to just a lack of confidence. Like maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I shouldn't be taking this on all. Why do all these other women make it seem so easy? How do they do it? I'm drowning. I'm always feeling exhausted. So those are the words. I hear the word in terms of actual, verbiage. I hear overwhelmed a lot, out of control, distracted. And there's just a lot of, I think, not a lot of self-love in this process. There's a lot of feeling burdened and I'm not doing it well versus appreciating how much they're doing and, how much they're really capable of.
I'll be honest, I oftentimes have to take a break from like social media, right? Because I'll see other business owners or professionals who are, traveling the world and posting a million things and, killing it in business and doing all these speaking and, the list goes on and on and on. And I'll see them and I think, how do they do all this? Are they not sleeping? Like, how do you maintain that? And you have to take a step back because, what we see on social media and things like that is not always reflective of reality. And it's easy, I think, as you talk about that sort of lack of confidence and self-doubt to start to think, wow, I'm not as, ambitious as that person. I'm not as productive. I'm not getting enough done. What's wrong with me? Am I a failure? And we really have to reframe that narrative. I mean, I'm here telling all of our listeners, like, trust me, I don't have time for all those things I want to do. And I just have to pick what's most important to me. And if you sometimes feel overwhelmed, I'm in that same bucket with you. And so I would love to hear, I mean, what do you do when you have these customers and they come to you with these challenges? What is that journey you take them on?
We go through actually a process, a 4-step process, but I'll tell you that the first thing that's most important, and you definitely, you clicked on it a bit there, we just determine what is most important to you. I think we've lost this idea of what we really want. I think we think we know, right? And if you ask a woman, you'd be like, what's most important to you? Typically they'll say, my family, my health, growing my business or getting that promotion. Like you kind of know it. But when we take a look at where are you spending your time? What are you focusing on? That's misaligned. It's not, actually the first thing to go is my exercise. Well, then I guess you're not really focused on your health. Or I'm not present with my children. Well, then I guess we're not in alignment with spending quality time, right? And so we've got to just get back to the basics of what is most important. Can we redefine this? Can we get it down on paper? Can we step back from the day-to-day crazy hecticness and get really clear on what that is once again? I think we know it, but like, are we really clear? So that's by the first process that we go through together is let's get that vision, let's get clarity, and let's put a little bit of detail around that. What does that look like? So if, for example, it is, I want to be more present with my family, what does that mean to you? It's very different for you than it is for me than the next person. Does that mean we like to have a family dinner 3 times a week? Does it mean we want to have an activity once a weekend? Does it mean, I spend an hour every night tucking them to bed? Like, what does that mean to you? What does it look like? I think we can start creating that vision and starting there and kind of step away, like I said, away from everything happening. That's a great place to start because otherwise we're just going through the motions every day, right? It's like Groundhog's Day. We're doing all the things to get through to the end of the day. But you're sort of like, wait, what is this for? What was that grand vision? I've lost sight of it. So that's like really the first thing. And by the way, I know I used a personal example there, but that's very much the same in your business life. Like, what does that look like? What does that revenue mean? How many clients do you really want? What is that vision? So that's the first step. And I can go on for the other steps, but I don't know if you had questions on that, but that's the first one.
No, go on. I'm learning so much, and I think it's really giving pause to, how to, you do this in business, or you try to do it in business, but not always in our life, like really sitting down and saying, okay, what does success look like? Where are we going? What are, setting that foundation of, what do you want this business to do? Or what do you want your life to do? How do you, create those priorities? So then what are the next steps?
The next step is to actually schedule it. It seems like maybe that's an obvious thing, but again, I think we are better at this sometimes a business, not always, but certainly we're less diligent about it with our personal goals. So if that goal of yours to get healthier, and that means the clarity is 3 times a week at the gym or with the trainer or 4 times a week, how do we make that time and where do we actually schedule it on the calendar? I always say, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities. I'll tell you your priorities, right? If it's not on there, it's not going to happen. The first step is, when is that planned out? And when you actually start putting pen to paper, that's when you have to make some tough decisions, because you might say, well, I have no time to exercise. I'm already waking up at 6 a.m. or 5:30. That's not going to fit in. Well, then what has to give? Where can we delegate? What can you let go? Where can you systemize? Where do we work better with an energy level? Like, where do we bring in some help? Like, there's other ways, but something has to change in order to fit those priorities into your schedule in a way that they're aligned with the demands that you have, but also allows you to reassess, kind of reprioritize the other things that are on there. And so it does open up a bit of, sometimes a can of worms, but it's so healthy because it starts pushing our boundaries or changing our mindsets or realizing, actually, I do have the time for that. I just didn't realize I could move something else, or I was making excuses. There's a lot that comes out of that process of, let's just get this down on paper and say where we're going to fit this in.
Is there an aspect of accountability and maybe not your own accountability that comes into play here? And okay, so true story, I'm going to tell you, my calendar is very much near and dear to my heart. And I am definitely that type A person where things are color coded and blocked off. It's like my time is completely, there is no time. And I have my to-dos in there and I have everything. And so I did exactly what you're saying, which is I blocked off time to just meditate, or yoga or whatever it is, take a walk, and I put it in my calendar, and then I just gloss right over it. like I see it and then I just pick to do something else, typically business related, and it might not even be that important. It's answering emails or whatever it is. And so how do you not just put it in your calendar, but hold yourself accountable? And if you're like me, maybe you need someone else to kind of help you with that.
I love this. This is so good. So I have two answers for that. One goes into the third piece of this puzzle, which is creating a system. So some type of system or process around what that is. So let's stick with meditation because that's such a great one, or exercise. You're right. We see them on our calendar every day. It just glossed over it. No one's paying attention. And then we move on. So if there is a system or process that you can create around that makes you more likely to do it or be in that success zone. Maybe it is, if it's exercise, it's I hire a personal trainer, or I'm paying for a class and that's the accountability I need. Or maybe it's actually I'm meeting a friend and I'm not going to stand them up, because we can always stand up ourselves, but not somebody else. If it's meditation, is there a particular area in your home? Maybe it's just a chair in a room that's quiet, that there's a sign on the door, no one enter for 10 minutes. Is there a candle you're lighting in there? Like, how do you make that space, that environment, something appealing and motivating and inspiring for you? But you know what? You can do all these things, right? And maybe you've tried some of them and you're like, but I'm still glossing over it. One thing I think is super important is that we've got to do this planning daily. And here's what I mean. Sometimes you'll hear gurus or experts say, plan out your month or plan out your week every Sunday. And I do agree with that. I definitely want to backtrack and reverse engineer my goals. And every Sunday I do sit down with my calendar and think through the week. However, I know if I'm glossing over stuff, it's because I'm just not taking it seriously. And so if we do the daily planning, which is really 5 minutes, this isn't a huge undertaking, but maybe the night before or first thing in the morning, but typically the night before is even better. And you sit down and you're really looking at your day, you're looking at your tasks. Here's my events, here's my Zoom meetings, here's my doctor's appointments, here's all the things I want to do. Where am I going to put in, like when I actually write it in again, like type in or write in meditate, what's the best time? Because what worked for me today may not work for me tomorrow. And maybe because I'm glossing over this is because every single day I have it on my calendar at 5:30 in the morning. And tonight's late and I'm just exhausted, so it's not going to happen. So maybe tomorrow during lunch, I step aside for 10 minutes and I do it. Or maybe on the car ride home, before I actually get out of the car, I'm sitting in the garage for 10 minutes and I do it. But it's so dependent on that day to day. So the actual planning that through creates that intention and that deliberate kind of planning for each day, instead of just seeing it on there. Because a lot of those ones that are, I have a very love-hate relationship with recurring tasks because of this very issue. It's great when it's a recurring task and you have a recurring phone call. You won't miss that. But if it's something that's personal to you, a recurring task can be really detrimental because you just won't listen to it. You won't do it. So you have to really plan it out day by day. Does that help?
It absolutely does, because I just make it a recurring. It's there every day, and so then I'm not as intentional when I start my day about really acknowledging what's there and what I want to accomplish. What is the final step? I think we've gone through 1 through 3, or we touched on 3 a bit. And what is that last step?
Yeah. So if you do the first 3, let's say you're very clear on what I want personally, professionally, I'm going to get it on the calendar like we talked about, and I'm going to really plan this. So be intentional and deliberate about it, not just put a bunch of recurring things all the time, and even to get some kind of system around it that helps keep me accountable to it. If you don't do the 4th step, I feel like everything falls apart. And that is really having boundaries. And this is, I believe, one of the number one issues or struggles or challenges for women, why we're working so hard, why we're putting in so much time and not getting to our goals fast enough, or feeling so overwhelmed or overstretched, is that lack of boundaries. And they show up in really sneaky ways. And it's everything from saying, no, this isn't a great time, or this is actually my time right this minute. Could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes. I'm going to turn on my do not disturb right now. The kids can make their own meal. They'll be fine. There's so many different ways it shows up personally and professionally, to take respect of our own time. We 100% teach people how to treat us and how to treat our time and how to respect it. So if we don't respect it enough, if we can't put up some simple boundaries through communication or verbalizing, simple tools that we have on our phones, if we can't enforce those boundaries, then we're at risk of all this other effort we've put in, like creating those goals and scheduling it and systemizing it. We're at risk of all of that falling apart.
So you touched on some examples of boundaries, but how would you, I mean, we've talked about boundaries so much, particularly over the past year and a half, as, the world has just changed so rapidly, and there's not, I feel like, those silos in our life of, okay, I'm going to commute and I'm home and now it's home time, or, I'm going to, switch the hat I'm wearing today. We're wearing all the hats all the time. But how do you define boundaries? And can you give us some more examples around, ways in which we can set boundaries?
Oh, sure. Yes. We could talk about this all day. How do I define boundaries? I guess it's your self limits or your rules. I would say limits and rules for yourself. And every time we overstep that or don't have one in place, I truly believe we're disempowering ourselves. We are giving up power to other people or demands or requests. And in the process, when we talked about in the very beginning how we lose our confidence, our self-esteem gets lowered, that's what happens in the process. It's such a bigger result, I think, or implication that we might think. It's not just somebody overstepping a little bit. It really gets down to the core of who we are and our identity. So examples maybe you may get, and probably you are, if you're a woman in business, you're getting an email or a text or ring or chirp or beep or some distraction. Research shows at least once every 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, all that. So it's constant. But what you are in charge of, you're not in charge of getting those necessarily. In some ways, we can unsubscribe and we could maybe redirect them. But for the most part, they're going to come in. But what we are responsible for and we can control is the way we react, the need to react, the frequency in which we react. So if we simply, really basic example here, I mentioned earlier, put on Do Not Disturb and close your email tab for 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that's it. Not an hour and a half, not 4 hours, not a day, 20 minutes at a time. It can be so powerful. If we've gone from being distracted every 3 to 4 minutes, every 2 minutes, go to 20 minutes. Well, that's 10 times longer that you're in focus, right? And you're less distracted. And it's amazing how much we can get through in these small blocks of time. We don't even know. We don't even know how powerful we are because it's been so long since we've set ourselves up like that for success. So that's like a simple example. Another example, let's think of something personally. If a boundary is for you to get up in the morning and work out, your boundary might be, well, at night, I'm going to turn off the electronics and get into bed at 10 o'clock, even though my husband likes just this might be somebody I know in my own household, like my husband, who likes to have the TV on till 11:30. And we have to have an honest communication about it, and a conversation says, listen, it's really important to me that I get up in the morning and take care of myself so I can take care of you and our family and our business. So can you go watch TV somewhere else because I need to turn off the TV by 10 o'clock? Right? It's a conversation, and it becomes so much more understanding than me just being irritable than because we're up to 11:30. So there are opportunities to reinforce or put boundaries in place at every aspect of our life, whether it's what we choose to respond to or how we communicate to other people in our lives at home or at work. Do you have some, maybe you have some examples that you're like, this is really hard for me. Maybe we could talk through that if you want.
I would say, to your first example around that 20 minutes, no email, no Slack or whatever it is. Like, my first question with that is 20 minutes this magical time frame? And I ask that because, I've read elsewhere that, our attention span. So say you've got a big project and you're like, I'm going to block off 3 hours to work on this project. But realistically, we've got 20 minutes of focus, and then we need 10 minutes of getting up and bouncing around and just, moving our body and shifting focus, and then we can refocus on the project. So is that correct that, we need to break it into smaller chunks?
So the research shows that 25 minutes is optimal, and you may be familiar with this methodology called the Pomodoro. And that's really based on brain and science research that indicates that our optimal productivity, our best quality of work is utilized in increments of 25 minutes, which essentially just means you do your best work for 25 minutes. So there is research around that. I threw out 20, 25 because I feel like given in the world that we live in right now of social media, of FOMO, that feels like a good enough time that I can get through a good chunk of something and not be completely freaking out that the entire world is falling apart without me right now. So that 25 minutes was created, God, that Pomodoro, I think back in the 70s, way before social media. And it's amazing how much it relates to social media right now, or any type of just general distractions, how I feel like that's just a good chunk of time. So in that research, they show that the 25 minutes is fully focused, 100% deliberate and intentional on one task. That's it, one task, followed by a 5-minute break. As you mentioned, you can get up, walk around, check your text, check your email, just make sure there's no emergencies, that the world hasn't fallen apart, and then go back to a 25-minute, another intentional, deliberate time on one task. So yes, breaking down these tasks into smaller chunks is really helpful in terms of your focus and staying on task, but it also just as important to help you stop procrastinating, to kind of get over the fear of starting. Often we're almost scared. We don't want to start something because we're like, this is going to take me 3 hours. When am I going to get 3 hours in my day? There's no way I can get 3 hours. Now we're procrastinating it. We're freaking out about it, or waking up at night. You're like, I'm never going to have this 3 hours. Now it's weighing heavy on you. But if you told yourself, I just only actually need to put in 25 minutes right now to create the outline, well, that's much more doable. I don't have to procrastinate that. That's just 25 minutes or 20 minutes to create the outline. Another 20-minute block in my day or later in my week might be to just, get the survey together. And that's that instead of the whole 3-hour project. So absolutely breaking it down helps you stay on task, but it also helps you get over that fear of starting or that procrastination that we do a lot.
Well, and another question, coming from a personal lived experience, is and I think many of our listeners will resonate with this, particularly business owners and executives, around the fact that, to be honest, my time is oftentimes not my own. There's so many stakeholders, if it's our partners or our team members, who have demands on my time, right? And I've tried to block in each week specific times when I will have a call or a meeting, and it's like outside of those times I try to create boundaries. But oftentimes that will slip away based on someone else's schedule, based on the need, and this meeting has to happen. But coupled with that is, on a personal level, my time is not necessarily my own either. I've got 3 kids, and I don't know if anyone has seen the movie Yesterday, but I'm pretty sure my husband and I really leaned into that hard this fall, not coming out of the pandemic, but with sports and things opening. If our kids said, I want to do guitar, we said yes. If they said, I want to do soccer, we said yes. If they said they want to do travel baseball, we said yes. And so, we definitely split the load, but we're always running to gymnastics or soccer. And, I recognize how privileged that is that we're able to do those things. And I'm very grateful for that. And I hope one day my children will be too. But it does feel that, when I have external stakeholders and internal stakeholders and family members, like all pulling on my calendar and my time and my energy and my bandwidth, that it is hard to then carve out that time for yourself.
Yeah. And I would say, I think for sure this last year, as we all know, this is a crazy year. This is out of the ordinary. And I don't, I'm not surprised, as many of us have jumped into a lot of things when we kind of got out of the stay at home for a year. So it was just almost like, oh my gosh, I got to do everything. I've been pent up for a year. So I get that. But at the same time, it kind of goes back to those boundaries. Like, if we've allowed all of that for everybody, for the 3 kids to do all the things all the time, then yeah, your time is your time and the bandwidth is all you have, and we will get stretched. And I'm not saying there's never a season for that or a phase, because that was the season and the phase that was probably just ripe for that after being in the house for a year. But as we come out of that, what is this next season going to look for you? Maybe it's they scale back to 1 activity or 2 activities each instead of all of the things. We're also teaching our children, right? These same skills that we want, we're role modeling for them, and we're also teaching them. So if everything's a go, then they're learning everything's a go all the time, And so, like I said, I think there are seasons and times for it, but we've got to be checking into what's most aligned with my values, what's most aligned with the way I want to live my life, and are the actions and the boundaries that I'm creating in alignment with that. So I think it's just something, again, to reflect on. And in terms of work, yeah, there are some realities there. I wish everything was black and white. There are certainly times we've got to take into consideration the hierarchy at work and who you're reporting to. But there are more, I will still push back and say there are more times that things are in our control than we give them credit for. And probably because we're so exhausted. And this is also part of if we exhaust ourselves and feel overstretched in our home life, we sometimes bring that energy to work that we're so exhausted that we can't push or create some of the boundaries there that we could or should. Certainly not in every aspect. When there's a CEO is asking for a meeting, I got that. But there are times when we can communicate with our teams in terms of, here is some time I'm going to be like really on my, my deep work, or here I have this time set out for meetings, or, hey, I'd love to help you with that, but could you hold that off to like after lunch, that question? I'll get right back to you. I'm just in the middle of this deadline. I have this deadline right now, or I'm committed to this, or just really honestly, hey, listen, I'm having a really hard time focusing and feeling really like just overwhelmed. Is it okay if we maybe touch base every day? If this is with your team, I do this with my team twice a day, we touch base and we go through all of our questions in one time instead of the constant distraction every 3 or 4 minutes. There are creative ways to take more control and put up those boundaries, but it often just takes some planning and more communication.
Great advice. Thank you so much for this and for listening to my story. So I wanted to end with just a couple of quick questions just to get to know you a little bit better. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Is it called ambivert when you're right in the middle? Is
yes.
That what that is?
Yeah, I believe so.
I've taken those assessments and I come right smack in the middle.
Yeah, I'm sensing you like quizzes and assessments. You must have been a big Cosmo reader back in the day. I don't know if they still do that, but certainly I loved those when I was growing up. What's your favorite day of the week?
Friday.
Do you have a dream dinner guest?
Michelle Obama. Because she's so smart and she's so funny and she loves hip hop. So, that would just be an amazing, amazing guest to have.
Yeah. A favorite recent read?
Nobody Succeeds Alone by Robert Refkin. He is the CEO, the founder of Compass Real Estate. I was just bragging on this book today. I was recommended to me by a friend, and I was surprised how much I just fell in love with him and this book.
All right. I'll have to pick it up. And one final thought you want to leave with our listeners here today?
My final thought is that, and I know we've talked about this, but I truly believe we can be far more in control of everything we feel that's thrown at us, at those demands, at those distractions, than we believe we can. We've got to, we can do it if we get back to being a little still, being in touch with what's really important to us, and thinking through, well, then how do I get there in a way that stays true to those goals?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ellevate NTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Katherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week. Thank you so much for being such a big supporter of the Ellevate podcast. We want to learn more about you and what keeps you up at night. What are the topics and speakers most relevant to you in your career? Please go to ellevatepod.com to fill out our survey, and we'll make sure to incorporate your suggestions as we're planning for 2022.